Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the panel for a very interesting discussion. I just want to make one or two comments to perhaps try and focus the audience once again on the complexity of the Syrian issue rather than looking at it from a very specific perspective. Starting by mentioning the opposition. The so-called Friends of Syria has bestowed legitimacy on a single opposition formation, and in the process of doing so have excluded others, specifically most of the internal opposition. And with reference to the opposition conference in Cairo, I think we should just mention that that opposition conference was not inclusive and broadly not seen as successful in any sense of the word. Also not necessarily seen as notable by the subsequent Geneva conference, which displayed broad international consensus, where this opposition conference was not even noted. Then on the militarization, I would also like to note that there is information available that there were exchanges of fire that occurred during so-called peaceful protests from very early on, and certainly earlier than 6 months since the start of the uprising. A question then, I'm well aware that the ICRC, for purposes of international legislation, is terming the Syrian conflict as a civil war. But I would like any of the two Syrian guests to perhaps comment on why this should be seen as a civil war as opposed to an armed insurgency. And then a question to Miriam, please. Pardon me, Chair, I know I'm stretching it a bit. Miriam, is the US presence through the Sixth Fleet part of the opposition discourse in Bahrain? And is there any context between Bahraini activists and Syrian activists? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just to ask our Syrian friends, what is the historical context of armed struggle in Syria? I mean, this goes back to before 79 already, and with the historical context of that armed struggle and its sectarian from way before. For example, in 79, they attacked a military academy. They singled out the Alawi officers and killed them. And I think one has to look at that historical context of the 1982 Hama massacre, because I think that sectarian line has always been with some of the Islamic groups in Syria. And this brings us to this convenient or inconvenient marriage between liberals and Islamists. Secondly, last comment, maybe just to ask the organizers, perhaps the absence of Syrian intellectuals at this conference who do not necessarily support the regime, but are also very critical and even reject the SNC, the Syrian National Council. It would have been kind of very good to have some of those intellectuals who are in Syria, who reject armed intervention, and who also reject the SNC, to have been present. I think we could have had a much more broader perspective than only the biased opinion, I think, of the SNC. Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. I just wanted to respond very quickly to a couple of things that Fawaz mentioned and Najib as well regarding my comments this morning. One, on the question of the US position, I actually agree. I don't think the US wants to engage directly militarily at this time. I think that they do want to see the regime overthrown on their terms. And I think they are providing assistance. Like all of the other countries in the so-called Friends of Syria, their support goes to factions of the opposition that they believe they can control, influence, and will reflect their view. They are not democratic in that sense. What I think is clear is that if they change that position, as Clinton has hinted at recently, and President Obama has as well, that it will not be because of the needs to protect the people of Syria. It will not be to support the Syrian democratic uprising. It will be because the United States has determined that it wants to win one of the other wars that are going on in Syria, the regional war of states, the sectarian war, and the global war with Russia. That will determine it. It will have little or nothing to do with the needs, the demands, the legitimacy of the Syrian opposition. I think in that context, it's right to say that it is not and will not be a fair fight. It will not be fair if there is a complete arms embargo. It isn't fair now. That's true. The region as a whole has been overarmed for generations by all sides of the Cold War, since the Cold War, by the West and all of its sundry allies. So I think that the notion of what is ultimately fair is not on the table. That's not one of the choices before us. I think the question of how do we stop the violence and do we get to a negotiated solution sooner or later with more people dying is what needs to be on our agenda. And then finally, I think that the notion of the role of the United States is something that we in the United States are trying to influence. There is great division, as you probably know. But I don't believe, unfortunately, that the so-called friends of Syria, the US or its other friends, are in any way interested in the needs and the legitimate demand of the Syrian people to change their regime. And finally, just one other point of information, which is not on this question. We just got news for a couple of hours ago. The Israeli court just determined that the Israeli military is not responsible for its murder of the peace activist Rachel Corrie in 2003. The court ruling just came down.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ebrahim Ganga, Channel Islam International. I would just like to direct my discussion towards the issue of sectarian differences in the Middle East. And perhaps to a large extent, it is being underplayed, I think, as a way of dividing the society. It has now become firmly entrenched. I mean, last night when we heard Wadda telling us that from 100 people that he employed at Al Jazeera, he could not tell the difference between a Shia and a Sunni. And that we heard from many quarters while interviewing people that were living in Iraq and so forth. But here was a stepping stone for allowing this particular violence to continue. Hence, if you listen to the panel today, you'd hear from every area that when they talk about a divide, Iran is in the center of all of the divide because of the issue of Shia Sunnism. It's not going to escape in the Middle East. And from here, it's going to continue being that if you sit down for any political solution in Syria or wherever else, who are the people you're going to be talking to? Which are the people and what type of identification are they going to come up with? If not the issue of Shia and Sunnism at this point in time. It is very dangerous. And for the region itself, the United States of America is not out of all of this. As Phyllis has just spoken now and has just mentioned, there are a lot of proxies that could be able to assist them. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, who was central command when Iraq was attacked. These are friends. And sad to say, at some level, a lot of the Middle East leaders also have been friends. When the 2001, at the time when the war of terror was continuing, one of the most famous allies of the United States was Bashar al-Assad. So when you listen to him in a dual voice today, sadly, Mohammed Mirandi, I have to say, hypocrisy.
Can I ask you to conclude?
There. Would you like me to stop, Chair?
Can I ask you to conclude? Yes.
Okay, fine. And then what I'm basically coming down to is that there are friends, and that, you know, a friend in need is a friend indeed. United States, where are you for Bashar al-Assad when he was interrogating for renditions from CIA in the Palestine branch every single day in Umayyad Square? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. The time has run out. Let me just ask some questions. Because it's clear if we don't start clearing up the confusion about Syria, we'll all find ourselves into very difficult problems later. Will our colleagues from Syria agree that there is an increasing challenge to the veracity of information that is coming out of Syria? I mean, the BBC report recently indicated that the London-based human rights organization, which pushes out a lot of unverifiable information, is picked up by Al Jazeera and then perception management right throughout the world. And so there's increasing questions about information coming out of Syria. Secondly, even the friends of Syria are getting agitated. They can't get a united NSC. So will you be able to explain to us, is there a united NSC that has a political program to find political solutions? Thirdly, there is now substantive evidence of foreign military forces fighting in Syria. Now, what are the consequences of that? In the context of that, as has been said, you can't deny that one of the reasons why the Syrian regime is being punished is because of its position on Palestine. What are the consequences if there is a military-led, not a political solution for regime change in Syria? And finally, has the National Syrian Council put forward proposals, as one of my colleagues there said, the June 30th meeting of the Action Group came out with political solutions, but you opposed the Kofi Annan program, you paid lip service to it, but in reality you did not support it. And Kofi in fact said we should give more attention to the internal opposition forces, but I got a sense there was an attempt to underplay the importance of the internal political forces. But in the end, the Syrians have to sit down and talk. You can say stop the killing, but you can't say stop the killing only from the one side. Both sides must put down their support. And I don't want to even have any illusions. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey are pouring in millions of dollars. So the Americans don't have to come in directly. And there are bases in Turkey that everybody knows about. So is that true or is it false?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panelists as well. Just a quick question. We're talking about Syria and the foreign arm or foreign intervention. What would the panelists say to some of the events that have led up to some of the massacres in Syria? I mean, just recently the Hula massacre that occurred. Does it strike any surprise that on that same day, Bashar al-Assad's uncle, Rifat al-Assad, was meeting the King of Saudi Arabia? The next day, Bandar bin Sultan, the former ambassador to the US, was appointed as the new Saudi intelligence chief. So aren't we seeing Syria being used as one of the first chessboards where Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and even now Turkey are going and playing now the geopolitical game, and the West will most probably back them playing that game? Because this whole Arab Spring has resulted in certain countries getting gained, certain countries losing out. And we're seeing these play in terms of the intelligence lines that are running through Syria, through Turkey, through Iran, through Qatar, and through Saudi Arabia, and they're all overlapping. And it's sort of happening at events, very specific events. Certain things happen, there's a reaction from internally and externally. So I don't know how you can sort of react to that, or what you have to say about that, because it's interesting to realize how these tracks of intelligence is coming through. Compare that to the event that the news broadcasters are telling us.
Really, I am from those people who was criticizing the Syrian National Council. My friend knows that. And I have resigned 3 months ago because of that. It's not because the Syrian National Council is it's because the Syrian National Council is not having exactly what the people inside want. The real opposition is coming from the people inside. And the Syrian National Council, maybe it's more advanced by responding for the people inside, but he was more advanced of responding of the demands of the international community, especially the American and the European and the Qatari and Saudi, of focusing on the political transition while the people is being killed there. The other group is not responding at all for that demands of the people inside. So it's I want to give you something about what happened. I give an example in the morning about my meeting with Fred Hoff. There's a lot of details to talk about it and events to talk about that. But the main things I am analyzing now, that the international community, leading by the United States, know that the opposition inside, peaceful or armed opposition. By the way, 99% of the people who support the revolution, who is about 80%, not like my friend is saying, the Syrian people, who is the majority of the Sunni and small minority of the minorities, and vice versa on the other side. those people is supporting the Free Syrian Army. In tens of thousands of demonstrations, where people is saying, saluting the Free Syrian Army. This is very a good sign. I think those people is not accepting what is being in the table, like the opposition inside, like Syrian International Council and the other group of opposition, which talking about getting rid gradually maybe from Bashar Assad and keeping the core of the regime, which is the domination of the Alawis minority over all the state through security and army. So the best way to push the people inside to accept that is to weaken them. Weaken them by preventing them of defending themselves. This is what's happening now. We have prevented by the American, especially to defend ourselves for 18 months till now. To accept what has been given, put on the table right now, and which will not be succeed, by the way. This is the real policy of the United States. It's not like this talking about they are supporting violence and this conspiracy about that this massacre happens because there is somebody appointed as leader of the security, something. You can't compare it. Before 3 days in Daraya, a small town close to Damascus, about 500 persons have been killed. I was following that from the minute they entered the city by my friends inside. You know, some of them was start yelling of those people who is killing this militia and Ya li Tharat al-Hussein. And the people who understand that this is a common slogan for the Shia, that we want to get revenge of Al-Hussein who have been killed 1400 years ago. I don't know what we have to do with that, as a Sunni. This have been said on that massacre. This is not matter of conspiracy. The conspiracy, real conspiracy, is upon the Syrian people. My message, and it was and it will be, look, the international community, we are going to win. We start before 1 year with one officer have been defected on the army, and now we have tens of thousands of maybe very light, with very light weapons people, and those people, okay, I will conclude with that. don't need I know the message. Those, they are going to get rid of the whole regime, not to build an Islamic Sunni regime, but to build a civil state like it was before Ba'ath and Assad, and this is what is going to happen. I'm telling the international community, please be part of this change. Don't let this go so far. Before 1 year, all the solution could be applied. Now it's out of date. The bad consequences is affecting our country and the region for decades now. Stop this. Stop killing directly. This is the best way to start any kind of negotiation. Stop the killing. Without stop the killing, everything is not can be applied, and we will win. And we will this revolution, but nobody will ask for the bad consequences on our society and on the region. Thank you.
Very briefly, I'll address two broad topics. Too many questions, but one may be related to the opposition. That is the disunity of the Syrian opposition, which is, by the way, is a reality. We are disunited. That's no news. But the fact that we are disunited between inside, outside, left, right, all kind of divisions that exist normally among opposition does not justify the brutality of the regime. I think this is a key point that I have to make. By the way, I did not use the word SNC in my presentation. I'm a founding member of SNC, but I was speaking generally from a broader point of view than just SNC. I think what I presented was something, whether you're inside or outside, you would kind of support. So having somebody else, and I could make the case for, maybe other non-SNC as an academic. It's not that difficult. I think what we have in Syria now is something no different from what happened in Tunisia and Egypt and Libya and Yemen and Bahrain. And all of these are legitimate causes. People are fighting for freedom and dignity. It's called Thawrat al-Hurriya wal-Karama. Now, it's true that it's complicated. It's true that there are regional players. It's true that that does not mean that we should equate the two sides. And in fact, applaud to hear some of you implying that. You know, you mentioned there were clashes even before the 6 months period. Yes, there were. But this is the most documented revolution in the Arab world by the number of YouTubes, by the sources in the media. And if you really want to see what's happening, you could do that. I'm not going to tell you where to go. Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya are biased. Yes, they are biased to the side of the Syrian people. Go somewhere else. You could watch the Syrian point of view. There's something called Ad-Dunya channel. It's entertaining, actually, if you like to get that perspective. And then there's the BBC. There's the Voice of America. There is France 24. But you cannot say that the two sides are equal. That, in fact, is something really, really kind of, you know, I cannot imagine that we could equate the two sides. Yes, there are now violence perpetrated by the armed insurgents, and they have committed atrocities. But look at the human rights reports. Look at them. They have documented both sides. Look at the Human Rights Council at the UN. They have documented both sides, and I will accept their verdict, basically. So, final point. Despite the disunity of the opposition, we have a unity of vision. The SNC was a small effort to bring together various groups from inside and outside. 3 revolutionary councils from inside are represented within SNC. Now, the unity of vision is presented in 2 documents in Cairo. And in fact, beyond that, there is something, an effort that lasted for a year, which many of us inside and outside, my colleague Fawaz and I were part of it, called The Day After. It's a detailed program about transition in Syria, addresses transitional justice, security reform, constitutional design, economic and social policies. And so if you want really to ask about whether the opposition has a vision, yes, it does. But everything has to be done after the removal of Bashar al-Assad. I think the consensus of the opposition inside and outside, that there cannot be a solution without Bashar's leaving power. Then we could talk about all aspects. We could talk about all aspects, transitional justice. We could talk about everything. Somebody may be objecting there. I think that's at least the consensus of the Syrian opposition, including the Free Syrian Army, which is, I think, is going to make the change. I think change is coming from within. And I believe that one step that would enable Syria to bring about change by themselves is to unify the various groups that's called the Free Syrian Army with the political side. And I think, I believe the change is coming. Thank you.
To very quickly answer some of the questions, the Fifth Fleet definitely does play a role when it comes to Bahrain. We, as human rights defenders from Bahrain, have time and time again referred to the United States being to Bahrain what Russia is to Syria. Except the only difference is Russia doesn't try to claim that they're selling democracy and freedom, which the US does. So it definitely does have a huge role to play, and I think an even bigger elephant in the room is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has closer ties to the United States than Bahrain does. You know, if the United States loses a friend in Bahrain, they could always move their base somewhere else. They have a lot of friends. But if they lose Saudi Arabia, that would be very problematic given the oil and so on. And so Saudi Arabia, I think, would be even more of an issue than the Fifth Fleet. The Fifth Fleet in Bahrain wasn't an issue to begin with the revolution or the uprising or whatever you want to call it. People in Bahrain were not talking about the Fifth Fleet or the presence of the Fifth Fleet. The US in the beginning seemed to support the call for democracy and change. Now they outright, you know, don't deny that they're supporting the Bahraini government. You know, they'll slap them on the wrist, but they'll also say that Bahrain has reached, what did Posner say? He said relative stability. This was a few days before the 16-year-old boy was killed. And so when they say relative stability, it means they're not going to do anything about it. So now people are beginning to pay more attention. So now more and more in the protests in Bahrain, you'll see pictures equating the Bahraini king with Obama and Cameron, for example. So these things are starting to build up. And these are one of the things that I've been saying to the United States. I've met with the Pentagon, I've met with the Congress, with the White House, and so on. And I've told them, the longer you wait, the more anti-American people will become. Not only in Bahrain, everywhere in the Middle East. And they've decided to make that mistake over again, as they like to do. As for coordination between Bahraini and Syrian activists, I've always pushed for that. I believe, the best way to combat sectarianism is by having people from different sects reach across the table and say, let's work together against these regimes who are trying to use our sects against us. Because the reality is, all of these different authoritarian regimes are trying to use sectarianism or religion to try and to divide and conquer. We saw it in Egypt with the Muslims and the Copts. We're seeing it in Syria with the Alawites and the Sunnis, and Bahrain with the Sunnis and the Shias. And the problem is that that problem didn't really exist. It comes from the regimes. They're trying to make it spread so that they can benefit from it. The best way for us to fight it isn't by buying that discourse and starting to talk as if it really exists. It's by actually saying, well, you know what? As a Sunni or as a Shia, I'm going to put my hand into the hand of the activist who is from a Sunni or a Shia country, and we're going to work together, because that's how we bring down those regimes. So I think that's something that I would always push for, and I have many Syrian activists who are my friends, and we definitely talk and coordinate a lot. Very quickly, I just wanted to touch base on the whole using Palestine as an excuse. Bashar al-Assad loves to use that excuse as them being, the #1 defenders of Palestine, given that they gave up the Golan Heights without any fight. But then also, in Bahrain, for example, what you saw is the Bahraini king made a speech, and I like to say that the Bahraini king somewhat resembles the Gaddafi of the Gulf. And he basically made the speech where he said, you know why there are problems in Bahrain? It's because they're trying to derail us from the Palestinian issue. We are working very hard on solving the Palestinian issue, and they're doing all of this because they want us to stop. Thank you.
Okay, very briefly. One, I think, with regards to Khola and the other massacres, I really don't know. And I think it's just as immoral for me to comment on something that I don't know as to carry out a massacre. Because someone says he did it. As soon as it comes out, one says it came right before a Security Council meeting, so they did it. The other side says that these people were saying that. I don't know. And therefore, I'm not going to pass judgment. The second point is that I think that Bashar Assad has pointed out, I don't think the Iranians feel that he's any saint from heaven. The Iranians are pretty realistic about him. In fact, it was Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish prime minister, who used to go out on vacation with him and his family. If he was a psychopath and his wife a psychopath, then why did they go out with him the whole time? So, I think that this sort of extreme.
But they're not supporting him, my friend.
Well, he wasn't. He
Can
wasn't.
I ask the panel to
he wasn't a Democrat.
Please contain themselves.
In any case, that's an issue. And I should also add, by the way, that the Turkish foreign minister told the Iranian foreign minister once, a long time ago, a year ago, that yes, I agree. If there were elections right now, that this guy Assad would probably win the elections because the opposition is so fragmented. That's what he says. Maybe rubbish. It doesn't matter. The point is that, in my opinion, the only way out of this is for elections with international monitors. I don't think anyone should be fearful of it. If either side, whoever they are, if they feel confident about themselves, then I think that's a way forward. It's not as crazy as it may sound. And the third point is that I wanted to point out, and this is important, I forgot to talk about it, and that is sectarianism, that the Iranians believe the Saudis and others are promoting. And that this is not just Shia, Sunni, or Alawi, whoever. For example, last night, the discussion was about the sectarianism and that the people should speak. However, the Kurds, it's a threat. Why the Kurds? Why is it a threat if the Kurds have a voice? We heard that last night. It shouldn't be a threat then. The point is that, again, in my opinion, this is what many people in Iran think, and it's my personal opinion. I have no idea of what everyone thinks, but on the ground, the best way for the United States, as it's declining relatively, to maintain hold over this region is fragmentation, and to have it sort of divide and rule. And the Saudi regime, which is the most despotic of them all, women cannot drive, I don't want to go into that. The Saudi regime legitimizes itself through this policy of divide and rule. And at the end of the day, this extremism that is being created can spread. Remember Afghanistan. And Pakistan is 30 years ago, Pakistan was a very conservative country, but we did not see what we have now. My good friend Kalim Siddiqui, who I had the honor of being his student, some of you may remember him, he used to tell me that we didn't even know the differences when we were kids. But Pakistan has changed. I was telling this last year to my Turkish colleagues, and some of the people here were witness to that this is the same problem, this problem will begin in Turkey as well. And now, last year they were saying no. Now in the Turkish media, there are all sorts of debates about how this is now becoming a problem in Turkey itself. So, the most important thing is to prevent sectarianism, racial hatred, and religious hatred. The Saudi Grand Mufti just 4 or 5 months ago said all churches in the Arabian Peninsula must be destroyed. This is something that has to be prevented. But finally, as I'm supposed to conclude, I hope the best for all my good colleagues here, although they may not be very happy with what I said. And I hope that the situation in Syria, Bahrain, and others conclude in the best of ways, and that and I'm also against military intervention against the United States for all its drone attacks and its crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Let me respond to one question about the fact that people from the Syrian government is not being invited here. I think the organizers did attempt to invite people from the Syrian state, but for logistical reasons they were unable to attend. So I think we need to just put that on the table, that this in fact was done, so it's not a fault on the part of the organizers as such. This has been a very difficult debate, and I know this is extremely difficult because people are still dying at this point in time, and people are emotional on all sides of this divide. And I think if we go forward, looking at visions for the future, trying to assist the Syrian people to come to a solution where the killing stops, where there's a political solution, we would then be doing something positive. I think our role is supportive. Our role is never one of trying to dictate to people. And we share our own experience in South Africa of having a negotiated settlement, which is something we put on the table for everybody. With that, I want to thank the panelists who actually were very good and presented a very difficult situation very timelessly and within time bound. Thank you very much for coming.